all of my Aldea friends. Thank you for that introduction, Jake. That was lovely. I'm really excited to present this message to all of you today. It's really a fusion for me of some of my rich life history that Jake had mentioned. But I'd like to first say, because we have a really packed sort of group of events for you today, I'd love to dedicate this message today to a dear, dear friend of mine and colleague who passed away 2 weeks ago, which was one of the reasons why I had to fly back to New York and could not give this message 2 weeks ago. She is also an audiologist, was also an audiologist, and we worked together on many, many projects. She would have very thoroughly enjoyed this message. So perhaps she is with us in spirit. This is for her, Marianne. So let's get started. I wear many hats. And some of you know me here at Aldea as the Connections Coordinator. And I do that a few hours a week, and it's super fun, and I love connecting the dots with people. But I have a little bit of a history with ears. And I have studied, researched, diagnosed, taught, trained, treated hearing disorders the good majority of my professional life. I am a New York State and Arizona licensed audiologist, and I'm board certified in pediatric audiology. So I have a little bit of knowledge when we talk about listening. But really, what I have a lot of knowledge about is hearing, right? So today's message is really a fusion of my work as an audiologist and what I may present to you today in that regard. My studies as a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher and mindfulness in becoming present, because you need to be present when you are listening in communication, and kind of fusing that all together. So why don't we just get started? But first, I'd like you to ask yourselves one question. What is the difference between hearing and listening? Bet you most people haven't really thought about that, right? So hearing is certainly a physiological event. It is something that happens very quickly, simultaneously, and it involves an exceptionally complex piece and organ of the human body that I'm pretty familiar with. It's called hearing. But have you ever really wondered what listening is? I learned a little bit about listening after I was practicing as an audiologist for many, many years. I learned about listening through mindfulness-based stress reduction. So what I thought I would do today is fuse all of that together and to present to you a couple things. Because I can talk all day long about hearing, and no, you are not at Grand Rounds of University of Arizona. We will talk a little bit about the function of hearing, because I think it's super important to understand how it works and how it's connected to everything else. But there's really two parts of today. Consider it a big pool, a pool called listening. And the first part that we're going to talk about is the information and the learning that I have learned about hearing, but also about listening through mindfulness. Perhaps some practices, perhaps some skill sets that you may want to practice to become a better listener to another human being, right? Maybe like a one-on-one conversation. And then the second part of today, we're going to talk a little bit about what's most important and where my learning really was. And my learning was listening to me. Listening to that part of being human that we are not practiced in. Perhaps the mind, perhaps the body. That's an important part of the listening component. So I'm reminded as I'm going through my slides and I'm going through my history, one of the things that I also did was we diagnosed babies at birth, few weeks after birth, with hearing loss. So sometimes myself or other audiologists where I was had to present very traumatic news to a family, that perhaps there is deafness involved or a very severe hearing loss. And one of the things that I would always be sure to do is to try to bring home the point that listening is more about the brain. Hearing is more about the ear. So I present to you the ear. Yeah. So as we talk about listening, there is the listening brain. And the listening brain is something totally different than the peripheral aspects of actual hearing. Listening is a creative force. If you've ever sat down with someone who truly listens to you, truly, you'll find yourself relaxed. You'll find yourself perhaps feeling like you could be more of your true self. You'll find yourself perhaps maybe being more in tune with your inner self and inner spirit. You may find ideas happening. You may feel safe. That's what listening does when you are with another person who truly is a part of this sacred act of listening. So how we listen brings forth what is true and alive in other people. I know I practice this as best as I can. I'm not always good at it. I know this really, really well. An experience with a very significant medical illness about 12 years ago helped me to do listening a whole lot better. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what hearing is, and then tell you a little bit about some practices that may help you to become a better listener one-on-one. So hearing is a remarkable event that happens. It's quite fascinating, actually. You know, sound travels in waveforms. It's physics. How cool is that? Some of the waveforms can be very small and some of the waveforms can be very large, and it travels invisibly through space until it hits the side of your head. And what happens is these little catcher's mitts called the pinnas take sound from outside a space, move it through the middle ear, which is fascinating, but it becomes even more fascinating how we hear. It gets bounced around a little bit in the middle portion of the ear, and the three smallest bones of the human body, those three right there, take that physical aspect of sound and move it to a mechanical aspect of sound, which moves sound mechanically into this fabulous structure right there called the cochlea. The cochlea is fluid filled. It moves sound. And when sound moves the hair cells, an electrical synapse occurs that takes that sound, depending on frequency, through the brainstem and up into the auditory cortex. Oh, how fun. That's hearing, everybody, in a nutshell. So hearing is wonderful, and it would be great if you had normal hearing when you were having a conversation with somebody. But it definitely is not listening. So let's go over listening a little bit. Certainly, you need to have the anatomical structures in place, and I hope that everyone has. And maybe you're compensating for hearing loss by wearing hearing aids, and that's absolutely fine too. There needs to be a physiologically functioning ear, but listening takes time. So for me, when I sit down with a friend or anyone who needs to be listened to, or I want to engage in the sacred art of listening, I can't be looking at my watch, right? If you've ever been involved with or sat down with somebody who just was so super hyper focused on you that you could be you It takes time. Do we have a lot of time these days? I don't know. It takes a little bit of skill. It takes time to slow down a little bit with no expectations, right? In a judgment-free zone where you don't get bored if someone is telling a story over and over again, where your defenses rest and your self-assertions rest. And in that listening experience with another human being, magic happens. In that experience, the sacred happens. You provide a space for ideas, for love to happen. Even when we are faced with conversations and opportunities to speak to other people who do not see the world as we do. This is your opportunity to pause. This is your opportunity to reflect and respond. So, a few things that we all can do to practice sacred listening is certainly to practice being in silence once in a while. This is something that I had learned through mindfulness, through actually physically forcing myself to sit in a room for 5 minutes without any activities around me. I would encourage that in all of you as you create a sacred space for listening to the human beings in your life. Practice 5 minutes a day, if you can. 2 minutes, anything, where you can sit in silence and train your brain to listen, to pause, and to be okay with not having to rush to take your time. I found for myself, when I sit in silence, I find that it creates a space for me. I become more open. I feel it in my body. It helps me to be more with others. Case in point, I sat in 30 minutes of meditation before coming out here to Aldea, because I really needed to calm the voices in my head of what my to-do lists were. I wanted to be present for all of you today. So if you can, the first tip that I would share is to create spaces for silence. Whether you call it God, whether you call it the God of your understanding, whatever that is, source, intuition, that's where it lies, at least for me, in silence, without distraction. Secondly, reflection. One of the things that through mindfulness and through training to just take my time to pause, I found that there was an inner voice inside of me. I found that I could find this inner voice who would tell me things, wisdom, wise things with which to say. It helped me to become more of a responder and less of a reactor. How many of you know what that's like? Where you may be on autopilot and you just react to everything all the time. My invitation to all of you is to practice response. Response requires pause. Try it. You may find an inner wisdom that you didn't know you had. All of these help you to become a better listener with another human being present in front of you. And the third most important topic that I would, or the third most important skill that I would share with all of you, mindfulness training taught me to be present. So what is presence? Presence in my world is a heartfelt connection to life. It's where attention lives. So I would ask all of you a question. And one of my experiences, and perhaps that's what Jake meant by being rich in experience too, is I've done a lot of silent meditation retreats where there's no talking for 10, 20 days. You are forced to become present with yourself. You are forced to do the mundane with mindfulness, with awareness, and with attention. And without that presence, I would suspect the person you are having a conversation with can feel that you're not quite there. Haven't we all had those experiences? Maybe we've been talking on the phone with families or with a family member or a friend where you're like, oh yeah, no, they're distracted. Like they're doing something else. My husband does this to me all the time. You know, where you just know that they're doing something else. Practice presence. So the next time that you're washing dishes, I would invite all of you to feel the water, to feel the dish, to wash the dish with your hand, and to just do so with intention. That's what presence is all about. And presence is incredibly important to the sacred listening that we all so want to strive to do, as it all helps us to really live the motto of Aldea, and that's love, period. So that's what I would say about hearing in and of itself and how it relates to listening with another human being. You need to have the anatomical structures in place. Everything needs to work, but it's more than that. You need to practice as well. So I'd like to move on to the next stage of the pool. Hopefully that gets there. Yeah. So as I said, there's going to be two aspects to this talk. The first aspect is really focusing on the physiological measures of hearing and how to listen with another human being. But I'd like to segue from what I just shared about presence and to what that means for all of you. So mindful training also teaches you about listening, and this is the listening that I was not good at many, many years ago, and I still don't claim to be good at it now. This was the listening I had to learn and practice to do. This was the listening to myself. Because you try being present with another human being when your mind is going 1,000,000 miles a minute on so many different things. You have no idea that your body is telling you something. Your heart is telling you something totally different. How present are you really to you? And I would encourage all of you to try this. Try to become intimate with you, so that you show up for the relationships in your life. God bless you. Right? So let's talk about listening to the body. And I'm going to interject a little bit of my story in all of these. So I have some quotes here. I will not read them, but they're there. And I love Rumi, because who doesn't love Rumi, right? The body is very interesting. When you go through a pretty catastrophic illness, you learn to recognize the signals in your body very quickly. You learn to respect your body very quickly. And I learned some lessons I had no idea I was about to learn. I learned to listen to what my body was telling me. I learned to listen to its aches, to its pains, and to its stories. And there were stories. For me, I didn't pay attention to a lot of things. And my body tried to tell me over and over again, hello? So, do you need to move? Do you need to rest? Do you need to stretch? What is it that your body is doing? And mindfulness is a fantastic place to start. This is not a commercial for mindfulness, but it is just my way that I learned to really focus on other things besides what was happening outside of me. So here's a story for you. I truly had to learn tension in my body. So what does that mean? It means when you grow up in a certain way, I held a lot of tension. I have always had energy that drove my family insane. My mother would be the first one to tell you that, okay? I just do, and I go. Maybe some would call that type A. I don't know. But there was a tension living in my body, and I know it when it's there. Now, here's what's interesting. I started to pay attention to that tension in situations. I started to pay attention to that tension when I was with other human beings. This was the focus for me to start learning more about boundary setting. Where did I need to draw boundaries that did not exist? And why did I not have boundaries? And that could be a whole other topic. We could talk about that all day long on boundaries. But listening to the body helped me to know the things I were not understanding that were going on in my mind. The body's an important tool. Pay attention to it. How about listening to the mind? What voices lurk there? Oh boy. Voices of past, voices of future, regrets, worries, rehashing. My question is there really any originality that happens in the voices that are lurking in my head? Because it's always about rehashing what happened before, or where I'm going, or the regrets or the worries. So what I learned in listening to the mind is this: don't believe everything you think. This was a new concept. A new concept of, really, don't believe everything I think. Well, let's test it out. Why not? I've done research for years. I know how to do, a hypothesis. I know what I'm doing. So let's test this out, right? And I'm going to give you an example that is really hard for me to admit to a group of people. And oh my gosh, this is going on YouTube. It took me a very long time to squelch the voice in my head that said, you are not smart enough to go to college. A very long time. I was a little bit of an older student back then. Now, did I continue to go to school until I still go to school? I just keep going. But the voices in my head were wrong. So I would encourage you, as you start to bring presence and attention to you, to pay attention to the voices that are lurking in your head. And whose voice is that anyway? Who is that in favor of? Certainly not me. So question everything and don't believe everything that you think. Listening to your heart. Also hard. I had to learn to really recognize what makes my heart sing. Do you know what makes your heart sing? Do you know when it's open, when it's closed? Do you know who your heart wants to be with? Do you know those things? What does it want to be doing? 5 years ago, when I was exceptionally knee-deep in my career, in my company, in my business, in my life, and I knew because I started paying attention, and it took me several years to do that. I knew I needed a career change. Not necessarily from audiologist to non-audiologist. No, I love the ears. I'll talk about that all day long. And I do, actually. But I knew I needed to move on from where I was. I knew I needed a change. I would have never heard those voices if I didn't just stop and pay attention. Listen to the heart. It will guide you in a place of wisdom. It will guide you where you're supposed to be. take the chance and find the courage to do that. Listening to emotions. Pay very close attention to these visitors. They tell you a story. And also meditation has helped me to learn the difference in emotions. And here's my story for you. I lived a lot of my first part of my life, as Richard Rohr would say, right? In a frenetic type of way. I lived a lot of my life with an anger I didn't know I had. Until something amazing happened. I learned to sit and listen to these emotions. I listened to what anger was in my body. I listened to the thoughts that were swirling when I identified this feeling as anger. And I learned something remarkable. I wasn't angry. I was scared. That my fear in life, as we all have, uncertainties, I mean, just like throw it in there. We're all like, okay, what can I be afraid of today, right? Now, I often ask myself, okay, you got some anger going on here. What are you afraid of? What is it that is driving you through these emotions? I would have never known those things. So emotions are an amazing gift. Honor them. Work with them. Be with them. Test them. They may not be what you think. And finally, listening to silence. I have read almost every book and journal that Thomas Merton has ever published, and he's just amazing. Silence is stillness. It is a very deep quiet. It's where the sacred happens, and I absolutely love this quote. And I love this quote from different parts of myself. I love this quote as an audiologist because I literally do talks on noise in our environment, noise in our world, and what happens to the human body. Noise and health is not something to ignore. Cortisol levels go up, arrhythmias go up. Noise is not healthy. So begin to train yourself in some silence. Sit in silence 5 minutes each day. Build it as you can. Everyone's lives are different, but try to find a space where you can. Because I would guess that some of you may come to a place where you begin to have that spiritual awakening that I also had. I believe Kevin had one too. And that is, you become part of the essence of all living things. That there is no separateness in silence at all. And when I sit long enough, I know that to be true in my heart. There is no separateness. There is only oneness of life. So what I'd like to do is end today with, if you're coming from a Christian tradition, that would be a prayer or an intention or a manifestation wish or whatever you wish to call it, doesn't matter. But it is my gift to all of us and myself that may we all be encouraged to listen today to all of life that surrounds us, and it does.